Yesterday, the Republican-dominated House Budget Committee voted against sending the president's one big beautiful bill to the floor for a full vote. Now, just so you know, I'm not being sarcastic here. The One Big Beautiful Bill Act isn't Trump hyperbole. It's the actual official name of the multi-trillion-dollar reconciliation package that Republicans are trying to pass in order to fund the president's ambitious agenda. Its momentary defeat came at the hands of a few members of Donald Trump's own party. Ahead of the Budget Committee's meeting, President Trump took to social media to urge Republicans to unite behind the bill, a sign that there was still some trouble ahead. He wrote, quote, "We don't need grandstanders in the Republican Party. Stop talking and get it done." But that was not enough to sway a handful of holdouts. Four Republican congressmen, Chip Roy, Ralph Norman, Josh Breachin, and Andrew Clyde, still voted no to advance the bill. A fifth Republican, Lloyd Smucker, supports the bill, but he voted no for procedural reasons in order to be able to bring the bill back up for consideration at a later date. But the four holdouts who tanked this version of the bill are deficit hawks. They're part of a group of lawmakers in the House who are pushing the conference to make deeper spending cuts to reduce the deficit and extend Donald Trump's tax cuts. Members of the Republican Congress, or at least some other members of the Republican conference, are reluctant to go that far. Those spending cuts, and this is part of the problem, they could come at the expense of Medicaid recipients who could see major changes sooner than initially planned. And that's another roadblock for Trump and Johnson to contend with. Here's another one. Whether to increase the cap for state and local deductions, state and local tax deductions. That's known as SALT, state and local taxes. This is a big issue for Republican lawmakers in high-tax states, for instance, New York State or California. The Budget Committee says it's going to reconvene to take up this bill tomorrow night. Republican leaders are still holding out hope that they can get this passed in the House before Memorial Day weekend, which is next weekend. The funding fight in Congress comes at a time when the outlook for America's economy remains uncertain, and that was reflected in the news that broke yesterday that Moody's is downgrading the United States credit rating from the top rating of AAA to AA1. Now, this is the third major credit rating agency to make that move. S&P Global and Fitch have previously knocked the country's ranking down by one notch. This happened in 2011, happened again in 2023, which means that America no longer has a top-tier rating from any major ratings agency for the first time in more than a century. In a statement, Moody's said its decision was driven by the increase in the government's debt and rising interest costs. It also added, quote, "Successive U.S. administrations and Congress have failed to agree on measures to reverse the trend of large annual fiscal deficits and growing interest costs. We do not believe that material multi-year reductions in mandatory spending and deficits will result from current fiscal proposals under consideration," end quote. Now, there's more pressing economic issues that the White House has to reckon with, and that is tariffs. Earlier this week, the United States reached a truce of sorts with China that saw both countries significantly reduce their tariffs against one another temporarily. That led to markets around the world rebounding and an immediate resurgence in shipment from China to the United States. Freight bookings increased nearly 300% this week compared to last week. But that recovery, if you can call it that, will likely be short-lived because the White House is preparing to roll out another round of tariffs on many, many countries. Donald Trump told reporters yesterday that his administration just doesn't have the capacity to make deals with all of the countries it's pulled into its trade war. And he says that in about 2 to 3 weeks, the U.S. will be notifying its trading partners of what its new terms and tariff rates will be. Read between the lines there. These are not new deals. These are new tariffs that the United States will be imposing without the benefit of negotiation because, as the White House says, they just don't have a capacity to negotiate with all these countries. Even though many of those so-called Liberation Day tariffs have been paused at the moment, and even with the U.S. slashing its tariffs on China, there's a 10% baseline tariffs that has been imposed on most imports into the United States. 10% is pretty significant. That's where this inflation talk comes from. And everyday Americans could soon start feeling the effects of those tariffs. In fact, this week, the retail giant Walmart said that it was, quote, not immune from tariffs. Why would it be? It buys most of its stuff from China. And as a result, America's largest retailer is going to start rolling out price hikes on some of its products, including bananas, avocados, coffee products from Latin America, and, of course, toys and electronics from, you know this by now, China. Lot to discuss here. Joining me now is the Republican Congressman Don Bacon of Nebraska. He's a member of the Agriculture and the Armed Services Committee, and he's a good friend of our show. Congressman Bacon, good to see you. I was a little worried. I read an article in a newspaper the other day that said that they're kind of putting some pressure on you to not come on TV so much.
Well, they said it used different terms. They said, "Can you quit kicking us in the nuts?" That was sort of the phrase I got. But hey, I thought your summary was really good, Allie. You summarized what's going on very well, and a little let down by the Budget Committee. The very people that voted no yesterday were the ones who demanded these high cuts for the most part. And we worked hard in the committees, all these committees, to find the savings, and we did it in a way to protect those who needed Medicaid and SNAP the most. I really worked hard on this, tried to find ways to do these smart cuts like work requirements. But I really wanted to protect those who are in need, and we got it done all through these committees. And you know, I didn't get everything I wanted, but I got 50% of almost everything I wanted, and sometimes 80%. And then I have these folks come back and say it's not good enough, and that they want deeper cuts in Medicaid and SNAP, and it's not going to happen. There's not enough support for it there, and it's it's a certain elements of our party keep moving the goalposts, and they know how to negotiate. They know how to take a win. And but we have worked hard to protect the most needy with the stuff that we've come out of these committees, and yet find savings. And I'm not saying I got everything we wanted, but I think we accomplished a lot. And it's just really discouraging when folks are making demands and you find a way to get there, and then they change their mind. Oh, we're going to move the goalpost farther back. That's what's going on here.
Now, here's the interesting thing. If we were in regular order, if we were having a debate about what the budget should look like, there are a whole lot of my viewers who'd be sitting around a table with you also not agreeing with where you want to be. But the point here is that there is a process in Congress, right? We hire our members of Congress, and there is a reconciliation process. There is a way in which you discuss these things in regular order and you come to some conclusions. I'm not blaming this particular Congress, but this has been deteriorating for some time. This concept of the budget is the appropriations are the one thing the Constitution says that you in Congress have to do. And increasingly, this has become a less and less democratic process.
Yeah, this is my third round of reconciliation in 9 years, twice in the majority, once in the minority. I don't really think it works well. But when a party has both the House, the Senate, and the presidency, there's an opportunity to pass legislation without the filibuster. And what I found, and I've been on the losing end of this and on the winning end of this, if you want to call it that, it really creates scars between the two parties, and it deepens the hyperpartisanship that goes on. Because in reality, if we sat down with the Democrats and talked about extending taxes, the Democrats, for the most part, would extend most of the personal or individual tax rates, because most people don't want to raise taxes on Americans by 20%. And that's what we're talking about. There may be some negotiations on the highest bracket. I think most Democrats and Republicans would agree we don't want to raise small business taxes by 20%. So I think we could probably agree to that. Yeah. Now, the corporate rates are already fixed. They're not going to stop on December 31st. But I would imagine some of the Democrats would maybe want to open that up and tweak the corporate rate. I think most of us want to support in the investment incentives, because when businesses, double the size of their plants to increase manufacturing, that creates carpenter jobs and all these jobs that go with construction. I think most people agree
that part, and I think you're entirely right, Congressman. I think there could be compromises on all these things. I think you're right in how we would get there. But you just made an interesting point. If somebody wants to build a plant, the tariff thing confuses that issue a lot, right? There are just a whole bunch of people who might be saying, I want a plant. America's a big country, big set of consumers for me. Maybe I'll just build it in Canada, where it's a little bit consistent and we don't have changing tariffs. The tariff thing, for the moment, maybe it'll get settled at some point, but for the moment, it actually discourages expansion and new plants in America.
Well, I'm the Republican who submitted a bill to put tariffs authority back to Congress. Article 1 in the Constitution is clear. Congress is in charge of tariffs. So what we did in the early 70s, we gave the executive branch emergency powers for tariffs. And I feel like in this case, President Trump has abused the word emergency tariffs as doing wholesale tariff policy change, and I don't agree with it. The fact is, Republicans have not supported tariffs since 1930.
Right.
And it's more of a President McKinley Republican in the 1890s philosophy here. Actually, it was more Democrat-supported tariffs in the 1970s. We have a really weird flux of our ideologies right now where we have some of the people in the Republican Party, not all, not me, are embracing the protectionism and isolationism. Those are 1930s Republican policies. And I was on an elevator the other day with Democrats that go, Don, way to defend free trade and way to stand up to Russia. And I go, yeah, you sound like Ronald Reagan. So I don't know it's interesting that we're having this jumbling of the ideologies right now. And we see it playing out real time there. But I don't think tariffs work, Alec. Tariffs are a glorified sales tax, and it affects the middle class the most. And you're right, coffee, we don't make coffee here.
Right,
we don't.
Right.
A lot of things you were mentioning, we're going to be paying more for all this stuff because we don't even produce it. And I think I could see a case for targeted tariffs against countries who are attacking us. But in the end, we know free trade works the best. It gives you the best product at the best price in the most efficient manner possible, and it keeps your own manufacturing competitive. And it works. In the end, it works.
So, unlike the U.S. government, we can't run a deficit. So I need to pay the bills by having a commercial break and keeping you to the other side. And I can make you a deal. I can make you not stay for the second break if you can tell me right now whether or not you're going to be becoming a Democrat.
I'm going to be a Ronald Reagan Republican. I campaigned for Reagan in 1976 when I was 13 years old. So I'm more interested in trying to stand up for the long-standing conservative values that I believe. By the way, and that's considered being moderate today. It's funny how these labels are being put out there. But I'm going to stand. I want peace through strength. I believe in good alliances. I know Russia's a bad country. I was really perturbed by the interview last night with our president. Asked 3 times about President Putin, and he kept attacking Zelensky. It doesn't make sense. President Putin's a bad guy. He's the man who's killed all of his opponents. Zelensky's the victim here. I just wish we had moral clarity. But I'm going to be the guy that stands up for the values that I believe the Republicans have believed in since the 1940s on. And I want to fight for the soul of our party.